Welcome to the NewsBusters podcast with your host, executive editor of NewsBusters, Tim Graham.
Hello and welcome to the Fun Zone. It's time for the millennials to settle in with their Dunkaroos and Capri Sun juice boxes. It's the NewsBusters podcast. Joining me today is militant millennial managing editor Curtis Houck, our White House Briefing Bureau chief. Hello, Curtis.
Good to be with you, boss man.
And our special guest today is none other than Kayleigh McEnany, former White House press secretary for President Trump and co-host of the Fox News show Outnumbered. Welcome, Kayleigh.
Hey, great to join you, Tim and Curtis. I feel like I know you, even though I do know you, but I feel like I really know you because I read you both on Twitter like ad nauseum all day. So it's a conversation among friends today, for sure.
Yes, well, you've studied at Georgetown and Harvard Law and Oxford, but now you've ended up with a Bemidji State, Penn State combo. We'll try to keep up.
Yeah.
No, please. None of those names matter.
I would like to begin with the current mini hubbub over Jen Psaki. She's still doing the briefing after signing a contract with MSNBC. I mean, I think we can all imagine how it would have gone over at the Stelter Shelter if you had signed with Fox News and kept doing the briefing. I mean, we can imagine. Steve Krakauer wrote in his newsletter today that she needs to step down, but the press doesn't seem to care, or do they?
You know, I'll leave all of that to Jen. I will say I do think she's followed the ethical steps. She said she's consulted with White House lawyers along the way, and so long as she disclosed her negotiations, it sounds like she's done everything above board. Though I do understand how it's a confounding scenario. Certainly now that her new job, if that is the case, if she's going to MSNBC, that it has leaked, it leads to a lot of really tough circumstances when you're fielding questions in the briefing room and perhaps doing interviews with that outlet. But, she did apparently do the right thing ethically and consulting, which is good for her. But I'll leave it to her. I do wonder, I don't know when her departure date will be, but it does become a little bit of an odd situation when for weeks and weeks and weeks it drags out.
I just wanted to say my favorite conspiracy theory is she's trying to get out and she's telling the Biden people, no, I signed a contract. Like maybe she wants to get out.
Yeah. Considering all that's been going on in the news and the questions, probably I'm going to guess right around August with Afghanistan after a couple of those days where she was probably like, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? So,
yes, August was the definite turning point.
Yeah, for everybody. We saw that here in Virginia. And really to follow up on that, to go to your book for such a time as this, which I really enjoyed reading when it came out, there was one page in particular where you had some really outstanding pieces of media analysis I'm going to read here and have you expand on. You were talking about reporters in the room when you were doing the White House briefings, and you said many of them were, quote, intent on editorializing and sowing a narrative rather than earnestly seeking information on behalf of the American people, while others still embody what fair but inquisitive journalism should look like. So, but all told, you described the questions you faced as mix of substantive with sensational ones and oftentimes complete omissions that just didn't seem to fit the press narrative, close quote. And the reason I read these is to expand upon, what do you say back to liberals who kind of think they have this cartoonish view of conservatives where we see the free press and we don't really believe in a free press and we want something more resembling state media. And we often saw that during the Trump years that, you conservatives don't like being pushed, but, facing tough questions.
Yeah, that's it's an unfounded criticism. And I'll say this, of course, we respect the role of a free press. It's embedded in our First Amendment. And as I mentioned in that excerpt, and thanks for your kind words about my book, there are some great reporters. And, I can name their names. Steve Holland, a fantastic wire reporter. Another one that comes to mind, Mario, he's a great reporter. I'm trying to think of some of the, Justin Sink, a great reporter who always asked the very substantive questions, the ones that got you thinking because they were very grounded in policy, But if you'll notice a commonality in the
Print.
reporters I just named, they're wire reporters. They're interested.
Yep.
They're interested in getting the facts for their publication. Zeke Miller of the Associated Press, another one, very different than the Jim Acostas, the Caitlin Collins, the John Carls, who were about creating a personal brand. Make no mistake, that's what this was about. When John Carl, at the time, the head of the White House Correspondents Association, I wanted to at least give them a shot. I was in no way delusional about who I was up against. I knew the press was far left. Nevertheless, I said, let's give this relationship a chance. And one of the first things he did was hand me a copy of his book in our first meeting. And I think it was called Front Row at the Trump Show. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not a show. You're not on the front row of a Trump show. You are asking questions for the American people. Have you lost sight of that being your job? So there are some great reporters, but there are some that lost sight of, I think, what the mission is. And when you start venturing into people's personal lives, getting caustic, getting angry, attacking the press secretary, the president, I think the public can discern the difference.
I was in the White House press corps in the first 2 years of George Bush, and you could see the difference between the gaggle in the morning where there's no cameras, and it was really very casual and pretty light, very informational. What's the president doing? Where is he going today? Where's the vice president? And then the briefing in the afternoon. And when the cameras go on, it's just sort of a different thing. Now, I know back in the days of Ari Fleischer, it was nothing like the Trump years, but you still did have people like Helen Thomas in the front row going, why do you hate the Palestinians or whatever?
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is we have coming up the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday. Obviously, that's the kind of event that shows the difference between the White House correspondents under Democrats and the White House under Republicans, because obviously the Trumps never dared go to that. And of course, Obama was honored at every one. It's a pile of liberal reporters. They choose a liberal comedian to gloss over how wonderful Obama is. I suppose what we'll have now is Trevor Noah's going to come on. I don't think he's really going to make fun of the Bidens. And I doubt very much he will make fun of Jen Psaki's makeup, the way that Michelle Wolf went after Sarah Huckabee.
Yep.
Yeah, what a disgrace that was. I know Sarah Sanders. She's just such an amazing person, did not deserve that, did a fantastic job as press secretary. One of the greatest people you'll meet. And she did not deserve to be attacked in that way. I think Michelle Wolf showed who she was in that moment. But it is interesting. You're exactly right to note the difference. In this case, the press secretary will be there. The president will be there. But why wouldn't they be there, right? They have, when they talk to the press, it is a conversation with allies, with peers, with friends, not pro for the most part. So why not just take that, move it to a different setting, and add in a dinner? And that's essentially what they've done with the White House Correspondents' Dinner and a Democrat tenure. You're exactly right. We saw it with President Obama. We will see it again with President Biden. It took a 4-year hiatus with President Trump. I'm glad that he didn't go. I think it was a wise decision. And, Sarah, she wanted to go and in an effort of good faith took that leap. And it's really unfortunate the way they treated her.
Yeah, I believe that was the same year that Michael Avenatti was instead the toast of the room.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So
Caitlin Collins was busy interviewing him out there, and that's really what's unfortunate, how, we as conservatives, we try to rise above and try to put forward, the better foot, the better side. And yet that's kind of so often what happens.
Back at us.
Yeah, it's you can tell. I always say this to people from being in the White House briefing room, and that is that a Democrat press secretary, as you said, is basically showing up to meet with friends, and a Republican press secretary is going into the shark pit. It's just a very different experience, and obviously, I think the sharks got a lot more hungry during the Trump years. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, and for you, it's been every day, whereas I think at the beginning of our conversation, it's Jen Psaki. You think back to Afghanistan, I guess, those couple weeks was where it was really tough across the board,
right?
Where she got a taste of what Republican press secretaries deal with every single day. So you think about that. And Kayleigh, I want to go to that important point. You brought up Jonathan Karl's book. You talk about that in your own book, and Tim and I both loved that. We thought that was really amusing, and that's the kind of thing that a lot of readers and listeners really enjoy. Those kind of little anecdotes that really kind of, in so many words, kind of give you a glimpse behind the curtain into what's going on.
Well, they always mock Trump as being very self-impressed, and then they do things like that.
Right?
Exactly.
They do things like that. You also write about your scrap with Maggie Haberman regarding that was just totally uncalled for. But one of your other chapters that I really I think spoke to your character and why you were successful is you have this entire portion about how your offense only was almost your motto and creed a core, not just for yourself but among your team. And you wrote that, quote, the liberal media seemed to have a preconceived viewpoint that always left Republicans on the losing end of the story. And you also noted how you as a team refused to dwell on the palace intrigue story of the day or kind of get caught up in John Karl's branding. How tough was it some days to kind of stick to that across the whole press shop? Or was it a simple enough yet significant slogan or kind of thing to go by that everyone was able to pull the rope in the same direction?
Yeah, I surrounded myself with a team that was like-minded, so it made it easier. As I was going up to DC, my dad said, come up with a motto. I came up with offense only. And I kept that in my mind. And it was so important because one of the early memories that just now occurred to me, I didn't put it in the book, but it is this theme so accurately and enveloped in a concept and an anecdote. I remember, every, let's say Thursday, Friday, you would get an email from either the Washington Post or the New York Times, and it would be a long form piece of palace intrigue that they planned to report over the weekend that would make the president look terrible. And inevitably, it would come every Thursday or Friday. And one of my first weeks on the job, I get one of these pieces. You get the inquiry. We're going to report this, this, and this about the president. And I remember it had something to do with like his alarm clock or time or something. So I went around the White House and I gathered all of this information. I tried to give them firsthand information that they would find appealing to include in the story that rebutted the narrative that they were putting out there. And then I read the piece of the New York Times. I think it was an Annie Carney, Maggie Haberman piece. None of my details made it in. None of them. And that's when I realized this motto, offense only, what am I doing? I'm sitting here, a typical press secretary would run around the White House, get all the details, try to rebut the narrative, but they don't even put the details in. I could have consumed my entire day trying to butt down narratives like that with things that would never make it in the piece. But instead, I said, no, we've got to do something different here, whether it means putting a positive piece that had the truth in a different publication to counter that narrative, whether it meant going to the podium and holding the press accountable on an issue, looking them in the eye, saying, hey, go do this research. Do you have this in front of you? That's what we needed as conservatives. Rather than being embattled and letting them set the terms, I almost ignored their storylines entirely. We'd give them a one-sentence quote. We'd go about our day and figure out how to get on offense. And I think that needs to be the mold for any future Republican administration.
And I think that's obviously what the Republican voter wants when they turn on the briefing. I mean, it seems weird to me that we have trouble finding the Jen Psaki briefing now.
Right.
Just try to record it.
Right. Whereas Kayleigh, yours was carried on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all the streaming platforms. Everybody was carrying it. And now it's mostly just Fox News carrying the briefing in terms of, cable over-the-air television. Everywhere else, it's just kind of hanging out there. So really, if a reporter from one of the networks decides to wake up and ask a tough question, nobody sees it. It becomes if a tree falls in the woods, didn't anyone hear it?
They're going to have to get it through Curtis's tweets.
Yeah.
That's where I get it, Curtis.
Yeah, I was going to say, they can't hide. But no, and I think that's such an important point to understand. And for a lot of people who read NewsBusters on a regular basis, it's not surprising, but I think it's always worth underlining, which is, it's a two-way street. That just in basic journalism, you provide them all this information that is salient to a story. And you would think when constructing a story, when outlining a story, whether it's, a news story or a paper at Penn State or Oxford, you would want to include relevant information. And Yet in journalism, we so often see relevant information, factual information is left out, purposefully left out. And instead, yes, they just run a little sentence. Philip Rucker is the other one that I often would think of with the Washington Post. Every month
he
with
sent
COVID,
a lot of those Thursday emails.
Yes, it would be in the Sunday Post, top above the fold in the center, about how Trump wasted, May and then June and then July. It just goes on and on and on.
About COVID?
About COVID. And and all the updates about Operation Warp Speed that you would be providing, all the experts, all the doctors, you really didn't see any of that in there. Dr. Birx with all, she's in the news now for things she's saying about the president, but she had the charts during her time, and that wasn't really talked about. That yes, it comes down to a conscious decision on their part to not include it, whether it's the reporter or the editors. And if it's the editors that are doing this at these newspapers, the reporters need to grow a spine.
Well, I'm going to guess that in this particular case, or in a lot of cases, when the newspaper sends you the story, they're basically sending it to you. They're not sending it to you for you to add to it.
Exactly.
They want to sense. They probably want to sense your level of freak out.
Yes.
But
the story is already written. The
story
is they're already written, especially when you get it late on a Thursday, early Friday. It's written. They're not interested in your response. Just like Lafayette Square. Think about all the things that were not true, and I told the press they were not true. And now we know they're not true. Lafayette Square. Okay. The inspector general said that wasn't true. Trump did not gas and pummel protesters to hold a Bible. So not true. Debunked. The bounties on the heads of soldiers in Afghanistan, the Russian bounties. Biden's intel community told us that wasn't true. You guys are the experts. That's why I love NewsBusters. I read your site every day because you guys are on top of this. But the broader public, they have lives to live. They're at work. They have things that are more important than paying attention to the news cycle. And it's easy to let Lafayette Square go and Russian bounties and COVID lab leak theories and just their narratives that are hard to undo once they've been so firmly sown.
I wanted to make this point, or this is probably something you have to deal with. Any Republican press secretary at the White House or in Congress or whatever has to deal with. And that is, how on earth are you supposed to rebut sources whose identities you're not aware of who they are? I think that especially with President Trump, a lot of these, they loved anonymous sources so much they let them write books by anonymous.
Right.
And it seems to me, we were laughing the other day, is when they quote anonymous sources in Biden stories, or Obama. I guess it was the Obama Disinformation Initiative, and CNN was like, an anonymous source says Obama's so smart about this internet stuff. It's how do you deal with as a press secretary reporters loading their stories with these anonymous source bullets?
It's a fantastic question. And this is something that I had to learn as I'm a small town girl. I come from Plant City, Florida. I, come to Washington, D.C. and to New York and go to these institutions for school and then end up going into government. And I get introduced to this whole different world where rather than, where I'm from, you put your name on something if you say it about someone. But here in Washington, I'm not in Washington now, but they're in Washington. People have anonymous sourcing. And what they don't realize is every anonymous source has a motive. This is what the public needs to understand. They have a reason that they are leaking. And what I realized coming to DC is that anonymous leaking is currency. That is your currency with a reporter. And I saw this time and time again. And you always kind of, knew or suspected this person as a leaker, this person as a leaker. And then there'd be a glowing profile on the individual or something good that would come out in a paper. And you just know that they're, leaking to people. And that is what it comes down to, brass tacks. It is a currency between reporters. If you are a government official, you give me this, I will give you that. It is quid pro quo. There's no other way about it. And it's the way reporters can get disgruntled employees in the White House or an executive branch, maybe overinstate their importance. Maybe it's someone who's never even met the president, inflate them and say, I've got 10 anonymous sources, all of whom are probably disgruntled or wanting something in return from the report. And then they won't take your word for it. The best example I have of that is that horrible story in the Atlantic where, and I've never seen the president so aggrieved and so upset and so just really emotionally moved by a story, as the story that suggested that he used derogatory names about fallen soldiers, which he would never do. And they had, I think, a few anonymous sources, and I gathered more than 24 sources with their names on the record saying that this never happened. But the 24 name sources meant nothing over the sources who wouldn't give their name, who had something they wanted in return from the reporter for the leaked information, false information that they were providing.
Yeah, and I think what was so key about that story, and that was one of my favorite things in the book, that like you added everyone was outraged about that, whether as a Trump supporter, Republican people who care about our military. You found that story so bizarre and shocking. And yes, to know that, the president, he deals with a lot, and I'm sure for him, a lot of things don't really stick. But I think for anybody, when those claims and charges are leveled about what you claim to have said about our servicemen and women, that hits differently. And I think what made that story so egregious, and why above all of them, that one didn't lead to any accountability from Barack Obama's little magazine, is that even people who were, I guess, on the out with President Trump, John Kelly, John Bolton.
Miles. I think Miles Taylor even stuck up for the president on that one. I might be wrong.
Exactly. I
might be wrong.
Yeah. So Bolton and Anonymous, two people who wrote and made money off of anti-Trump books, came out and said, "All right, guys, this is a bridge too far." And so when you have that, and there's still no accountability, it really. That story in particular, I think, really was a key inflection point in the election.
I was just looking at Kayleigh, I was just looking at the vice presidential debate transcript for nerdy reasons, because Susan Page was running around saying, how dare the Republicans pull out of the Commission on Presidential Debates with independent-minded moderators? Oh. Yeah, Kamala Harris had an answer to Pence that was totally jack-loaded with the Atlantic story and the Bounty story. And Pence was trying to get in the middle of that, and the moderator's like, no.
Right. That's the best thing the Republican National Committee has done. They've done a lot of good things. I worked there for 3 years. I think very highly of Ronna McDaniel, but I'm so proud of them saying we want to pull out of this. It's not a working scenario. You're exactly right to point out those two stories that just glided by on a debate stage. Vice President Pence unable to challenge them. It was a crazy day, that day that story came out. And I wish your listeners would ask themselves, is this to you how you think journalism should work? Where it was my deputy, Judd Deere, who contacted me about this salacious story coming out in the Atlantic. I believe he got word of it maybe 2 to 3 hours before it dropped. Very little detail about exactly what was in the story. We don't have our government emails, so we can't jog our memories. But to the best of both of our recollections, it was a very vague email. It was right before the story popped. I'm on the tarmac. The story drops, explosive story suggesting President Trump called soldiers these horrible names. No chance to get the information, no chance to bring forward those 24 sources. That takes time. You're scrambling on a tarmac. This is a hit job. This is what a Democrat operative does when they put together a fake dossier and just drop it to try to influence an election. That's not what a journalist does. But that is too often how journalism worked in the Trump administration. Is we're going to drop a story, very little notice. Maybe we won't tell you what's in it. And we're just going to blindside you and let it be the narrative and hope, maybe you can combat it. Maybe you can't.
Well, this episode in shamelessness was followed up by another episode of shamelessness, and that is The Atlantic magazine hosting a conference on disinformation.
You're right. Right. These stories just, they write themselves.
So one of the things we were talking about, Curtis and I were talking about, was the one of our favorites. I think what a lot of people liked was the Kayleigh McEnany smackdown at the end of the briefing, and the briefing book, and people would sort of try to mock you about the briefing book. What were you?
Yeah,
saying?
no, and I noticed that Jen does the same thing. She has her pile of papers and binder. And I think that's something that anybody should want or think about when they're going before a press that dozens of people that can really ask you any question.
Right.
You could have one question, like, nowadays you might have Simon Ateba from Today News Africa asking about the Cameroonians, or, then you might have, Philip Wegman asking about Anita Dunn coming back into the White House. And you're just kind of completely going around the spectrum. So you have to have something in your mind. But you noted this, and we saw it in real time, which is you were ripped to shreds. People were kind of making fun of you, questioning whether you were really smart, if you needed that big of a binder. But that was something that I think you spent a lot of time in the book talking about. And I just wondering, like, if for our listeners, if you could talk about that a little bit, about how your team, you helped prepare that, and kind of what made you think that you wanted to have all of that information with you highlighted, the top lines, the dividers there that in that famous, Getty photo. If you could talk about that, because you spent a lot of time preparing, not just talking points, but emailing people at other agencies, and you would reference that I just talked to this person before I came out here.
Yeah, I had a senator say to me during my tenure, I could tell very quickly that you went to law school, and I could tell very quickly that you went to a good law school based on the way you conduct your briefings and based on the way I see your binder. And he said that, and I think it stuck with me, because when you are a Republican press secretary, in my view, to do the job, you are going to be attacked. There, you are. That is. You just have to plan for that. It's not going to be, unfortunately, a decorum back and forth that is substantive about gas prices or inflation or foreign policy, China. It's just, some questions will be that, but you have to be prepared for the whole gambit. And you almost have to prepare as if you are an attorney going into a court of law. I don't think you need that same level of preparation if you're a Democrat in a Democrat administration, because the questions are of a much lower caliber, or perhaps not lower caliber, I should say more of a substantive nature, which makes them higher caliber and more worthy of the time of the American people. So when I would go in, I would prepare for everything, just as an attorney would, who would have reams and reams of papers and exhibits as they would go into a courtroom, because that's what it was. That's essentially what it was. When you had the Jim Acostas of the world, who were willing to shout anything at you, I wanted every single data point at my fingertip, every graph at my fingertip, every footnote at my fingertip, because unlike sometimes when I would challenge the reporters, hey, you're reading a quote, do you have the full quote in front of you? They'd say no, they have one job, they have one question they're asking. I wanted to make sure I was never caught off guard, not having a footnote or a source to a fact that I was providing. So I take great pride in the binder. As one Washington Post longtime reporter said, or rather he said it to the Washington Post, it was the War and Peace of binders. And I will take that if that is my recipe.
Yeah, and I just as a final comment on that topic, like so often what I see watching every Psaki briefing now, so many of the questions, yes, are if they're not asking about the dog major, or how does the president feel? How is it affecting him? It's so often, yes, a process question. It is, yes, helpful question that, like the topic of the day that the White House wants to be talking about is COVID. How many of these treatment pills are going to be available? Where can you get them? They're going to be asking questions like that are worth asking, but there's not really, that's all it is.
Well,
and then you just move down the room instead of really any pushback.
There's nothing wrong with the process question, but the problem is we were talking about this too, is I want to do a study of Jen Psaki's sound bites on the evening news, because it seems to me that they're always very sedate. They're never embarrassing. So like when the National Guardsman drowns in the Rio Grande and she says, well, that was Texas's problem, that quote is not going to make it on the news. And in the Trump years, it was Acosta, it was Paula Reed, somebody, you'd get the shouting reporter and the rebuttal. It's just, again, demonstrates a difference in the way that these briefings are operated. And I should add, you also didn't have to put somebody in a bunny suit to direct them away from the president.
No, that is very true. In fact, my aides would not have been in the vicinity of the president, which is confounding in and of itself. Normally, if you're a younger press aide, you very rarely see the president. You're certainly not in a bunny costume stopping in from talking to reporters. That wouldn't have worked in the Trump world. But yeah, you make a really good point. And even when you do answer the question correctly, and this is where I'm so thrilled about the Elon Musk takeover. You would have this reporter on Twitter who could totally contort things, change things, and then you had much less reach as a conservative because so many conservatives were shadow banned, weird algorithms. An example that comes to mind is I was asked about school reopenings with kids and whether kids should be back in school. And I said, yes, of course they should. The science should not stand in the way on this because the science is on our side. And I listed off all of these studies, JAMA studies, showing kids are less likely to transmit COVID. They're less affected by it, the harms and the detriments of not being in school. But Jim Acosta just takes the soundbite, the science should not stand in the way, which is the exact opposite of what I was saying.
Right.
The second part was because the science is on our side. And I go back to the press brief or my press secretary office. I look up, it's an MSNBC chyron. It's a CNN chyron. And then you'd call the head of MSNBC or their political director and say, hey, this is disingenuous. They'd say, I'll see what I can do about it. Nothing changes. Even Jake Tapper called out Jim Acosta and said, hey, that's not what you said. It didn't matter. It was already a narrative that they'd sown and they put across cable news.
Well, you mentioned Elon Musk. That, of course, is the thing that everybody's enjoying on Twitter, the liberal meltdown. We were giggling this morning at Brian Stelter trying to claim Elon Musk is undereducated on the complexities of content moderation. Like he's going to tell the electric car billionaire how to do things. I noticed today on the show, you were talking about what it was that the amazing thing that Ari Melber said on MSNBC last night. Let's play a clip of that.
You own all of Twitter or Facebook or what have you. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't even have to be transparent. You could secretly ban one party's candidate or all of its candidates, all of its nominees, or you could just secretly turn down the reach of their stuff and turn up the reach of something else. And the rest of us might not even find out about it till after the election.
That's just amazing that he doesn't seem to understand that this kind of ban or crushing is what we've been witnessing for years now.
For years. I mean, this is incredible, right? He says, what if a social media platform could, suppress a candidate? Oh, wait, they did. That his name was President Trump. And what if they could quash a story? Oh, wait, they did. It's Hunter Biden. But what is encouraging and heartening to me, you mentioned Elon Musk taking over, that Ari Melber clip. I woke up and I saw it. I went to bed and I saw it. I was riding home from work and I saw it. And it had more than 4 million impressions or views as of 10 a.m. I bet had that occurred 48 hours ago, and I understand Elon Musk hasn't taken operational control yet. However, something has changed in the last 24 hours at Twitter. I don't know if they're rolling back algorithms or what. I hope Elon Musk shines light on it. But that would not have gotten that type of reach, I think, in a Twitter universe 24 hours ago. So what's encouraging is in one of these three silos of power, corporate America, social media, and then news media, at least in social media, a huge stride has been made towards leveling the playing field between the two parties and the two ideologies.
I was just going to, as we're going to wrap up, but I was going to just ask, yes, if you had any advice for Republican press secretaries. I suppose Ron DeSantis' press secretary doesn't need much
Christina
advice.
Pushaw is, yeah.
She does a great job.
Yeah,
yes,
she's phenomenal.
Out there.
But just
yes.
This whole notion of basically, yes, this sort of DeSantis model. I mean, obviously, they seem to hate DeSantis as much as Trump these days, and I think are afraid of him. But just this whole approach they're taking, which is they're going after Disney for one, just woke corporations that also own a news division.
Whoops.
How does a Republican politician and press shop handle that kind of issue now?
Yeah, I think, President Donald Trump taught me a lot, certainly as a conservative. And it was that we had no choice but to be bold and to be strong and to proclaim the truth loudly, which is what he did. And at first, when he first came on the scene, I was taken aback by him. You can't say that. What is this guy doing? he was exactly right. He defeated the noise by cutting through the noise and being bold. And I think he set a path that, I walked down and being bold and countering the press that Governor Ron DeSantis is walking down, certainly. And I think he's put the playbook forward. And any future Republican press secretary, I would just say to be bold, to fight back, because you're not going to win by staying on defense. You got to be on offense. You can do it with grace. That's what I tried to do. I believe in doing things with grace and kindness, but you can still be strong and offense only. That's the name of the game.
Yeah, this is always the tough thing, I think, when you're trying to be a good person on Twitter.
Yeah, it's always this balance that, yes, we have facts and you're coming in with high heat at you, but you still keep composed. And on that note, Kayleigh, last thing for me is overall, I think that there were two things personally that I took away from you as a person and your book. And the one that you don't have to talk about, I just have to state for our readers that I think doesn't get mentioned enough is, the threats that conservatives face, that they're not a joke. And that's something that I don't think you really hear as much about in the press, not as much kvetching. But the one that you do have a comment on is your faith, and particularly Christians. I think one of the reasons why, you don't see conservative meltdowns the same sort of way that you see with a lot of liberals and some journalists on 2016 election, name an issue, fill in the blank, that we can rest knowing in our identity in Christ, and we know how our story ends. For those who haven't accepted Jesus, the politics and winning on the battlefield in DC is how they determine what a good life looks like. I bring those up just as something that you really talk about, having grounded your career in and your life in, and how it really makes people ask, what makes you different? And that's why.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. You hit the nail on the head, Curtis. You said that very well. It reminds me of something I go back to when I first started at CNN and I rounded the corner and, preparing for one of these debate nights. It was the first night, or rather it was an election night. I'm rounding the corner and, you're nervous walking into a green room. I was young at the time. And Van Jones, who obviously about as different from me politically as you could ever be, said to me, "I love your cross," before he even introduced himself. And it's something that we bonded over. And, he's someone that I can say, and I know he's a brother in Christ. At the end of the day, it's not left, it's not right, not Republican, not different Democrat. It's about Jesus Christ. And when you have that as your center, your more and your compass, everything else just becomes secondary. And I can say in my life, Jesus Christ is at the center. I'll always be a Republican, but my friend Van Jones, we've got something far bigger than our political party, and that's our faith.
We try to say all the time, it's like, we're not saying Jesus is a Democrat. We're not saying Jesus is a Republican. I think the mistake is to try to presume that he's one or the other.
Yeah.
There you go. Exactly.
Well, we appreciate you coming and joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedule, owning the libs.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kayleigh. It has been an absolute pleasure being able to speak with you today.
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you, Tim. Keep up the great work. I love NewsBusters Media Research Center. It's, to me, one of, if not one of the top go-to sources for me. You guys are great, and I'm so glad that you exist. It's awesome. So keep up the great work. Love you guys.
We appreciate it. All right. Well, if you're a newbie and you're just joining in to listen to Kayleigh, we must tell you, the NewsBusters podcast is posted on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So like, share, and download willy-nilly, and come around to read us on NewsBusters, because Kayleigh told you to. Once, twice, 24 times a day. Thanks for listening.